Well, I don't really love it. It's kind of small, not big enough, not heavy enough. I don't want it's a lightweight poncho. I want a heavyweight poncho. I still want to get I got one that's bigger and heavier than this, but I don't have it out right now. Anyway, I threw this on the other day because it was cold in the bedroom the other day, and so I just put it on. I threw it on today just to do the video. Okay, so here we are, chapter 16, The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis. So, last chapter of chapter 15, and this is the last chapter. I will go back and redo chapter 11 because that was the one I did live and my microphone boomed out. Okay. The two children were nearly dropping with tiredness and hunger, but the warmth of the cave and the very sight of it, with the firelight dancing on the walls and dressers and cups and saucers and plates and on the smooth stone floor, just as it does in a farmhouse kitchen, revived them a little. But all the same they went fast asleep while supper was being got ready. And while they slept, Prince Rilian was talking over the whole adventure with the older and wiser beasts and dwarves. And now they all saw what it meant. How a wicked witch, doubtless the same kind as that white witch who had brought the great winter on Narnia long ago, had contrived the whole thing, first killing Rilian's mother and enchanting Rilian himself. And they saw how she had dug right under Narnia and was going to break out and rule it through Rilian, and how he had never dreamed that the country of which she would make him king in name but really her slave, was his own country. And from the children's part of the story, they saw that how she was in league and friendship with the dangerous giants of Harfang. And the lesson of it all is, Your Highness, said the oldest dwarf, that those northern witches always mean the same thing, but in every age they have a different plan for getting it. So the enemy is always out there in every age, people. That's one thing you learn from that. The Nephilim, the evil forces of the enemy, are always at work through every age. They have a little bit different way of getting it, maybe. Pretty consistent, I would say, though. Okay, so chapter 16 is called The Healing of Harms. When Jill awoke the next morning and found herself in a cave, she thought for one horrid moment that she was back in the underworld. But when she noticed that she was lying on a bed of heather with a furry mantle over her and saw a cheery fire crackling, as if newly lit on a stone hearth, and farther off morning sunlight coming in through the cave's mouth, she remembered all the happy truth. They had had a delightful supper, all crowded into that cave, in spite of being so sleepy before it was properly over. She had a vague impression of dwarves crowding around the fire with frying pans rather bigger than themselves, and the hissing and delicious smell of sausages, and more sausages, and not wretched sausages half full of bread and soybeans either. You see, this isn't like TVP either, huh? Soybeans. No estrogen burgers, sausages. All right. But real meaty, spicy ones, fat and piping hot and burst and just the tiniest bit burnt. And great mugs of frothy chocolate and roast potatoes and roast chestnuts and baked apples and raisins stuck in where the cores had been. Baked apples, they core it out and then stick raisins in the core of the apple and bake them. And then ices just to freshen you up after all the hot things. Jill sat up and looked around. Puddleglum and Eustace were lying not far away, both fast asleep. Hi, you two, shouted Jill in a loud voice. Aren't you ever going to get up? Shoo, shoo, said a sleepy voice somewhere above her. Time to be settling down. Have a good snooze. Doo-doo, doo-doo. Don't make a to-do. Doo-hoo, doo-hoo. Why, I do believe, said Joe, glancing up at a white bundle of fluffy feathers which was perched on top of a grandfather clock in one corner of the cave. I do believe it's Glimfeather. True, true, whirred the owl, lifting its head up from under its wing and opening one eye. I came up with a message for the prince at about two. The squirrels brought us the good news. Message for the prince, he's gone. You're to follow, too. Good day, and the head disappeared on again. As there was seemed no further hope of getting any information out from the owl, Jill got up and began looking around for any chance of a wash and some breakfast. But almost at once a little fawn came trotting into the cave with a sharp clickety-clack of his goaty hoofs on the stone floor. Ah, you've woken up at last, daughter of Eve, he said. Perhaps you'd better wake the son of Adam. You've got to be off in a few minutes, and the two centaurs have very kindly offered to let you ride on their backs down to Cair Paravel. He added in a lower voice, of course you realize it's the most special and unheard of honor to be allowed to ride a centaur. I don't know that I've ever heard of anyone doing it before. I wouldn't do to keep them waiting. Where's the prince, was the first question of Eustace and Puddleglum as soon as they had been wakened. He's gone down to meet the king, his father, at Cair Paravel, answered the fawn, whose name was Orunz. His majesty's ship is expected in the harbor at any moment. It seems that the king met Aslan, I don't know whether it was in a vision or face to face, before he had sailed very far. And Aslan turned him back and told him he would find his long-lost son awaiting him when he reached Narnia. Eustace was now up, and he and Jill sat about helping Orange to get to breakfast. Puddleglum was told to stay in bed. A centaur called Cloudbirth, a famous healer, or as Orange called it, a leech, was coming to see his burnt foot. Ah, said Puddleglum in a tone almost of contentment. He'll want to have the leg off at the knee, I shouldn't wonder. You see if he doesn't. But he was quite glad to stay in bed. Breakfast was scrambled eggs and toast, and Eustace tackled it just as if he had not had a very large supper in the middle of the night. I say, son of Adam, said the fawn, looking with a certain awe at Eustace's mouthfuls. There's no to be hurry quite so dreadfully as that. I don't think the centaurs have quite finished their breakfasts yet. Breakfasts, plural, yet. Then they must have gotten up very late, said Eustace. I bet it's after 10 o'clock. Oh, no, said Orange. They got up before it was light. Then they must have waited the dickens of a time for breakfast, said Eustace. Oh, no, they didn't. They began eating the minute they awoke. Golly, said Eustace, do they eat a very big breakfast? Why, son of Adam, don't you understand? A centaur has a man's stomach and a horse stomach. And, of course, both want breakfast. So, first of all, he has porridge and pavenders and kidneys and bacon and omelets and cold ham and toast and marmalade and coffee and beer. And after that, he attends to the horse part of himself by grazing for an hour or so, and finishing up with a hot mash, some oats, and a bag of sugar. That's why it's such a serious thing to invite a centaur to stay for the weekend. A very serious thing indeed. At that moment, there was a sound of horse hooves tapping on the rock from the mouth of the cave, and the children looked up. The two centaurs, one with a black and one with a golden beard flowing over their magnificent bare chests, stood waiting for them, bending their heads a little as if to look into the cave, so as to look into the cave. Then the children became very polite and finished their breakfast very quickly. No one thinks the centaur funny when he sees it. They are solemn, majestic people full of ancient wisdom which they learn from the stars, not easily made either merry or angry, but their anger is terrible in a tidal wave when it comes. Goodbye, dear Puddleglum, said Jill, going over to the Marshwiggles' bed. I'm sorry we called you a wet blanket. So am I, said Eustace. You've been the best friend in the world. And I do hope we'll meet again, added Jill. Not much chance of that, I should say, replied Puddleglum. I don't reckon I'm very likely to see my old wigwam again either. And that prince, he's a nice chap, but do you think he's very strong? Constitution ruined with living underground, I shouldn't wonder. Looks the sort of thing that might go off any day. Puddleglum, said Jill, you're a regular old humbug. You sound as doleful as a funeral, and I believe you're perfectly happy. And you talk as if you were afraid of everything when you're really as brave as a lion. Now, speaking of funerals, began Puddleglum, but Jill, who heard the centaurs tapping with her heels behind her, surprised him very much by flinging her arms around his thin neck and kissing his muddy-looking face, while Eustace wrung his hand. Then they both rushed away to the centaurs, and Marshwiggle, thinking back in his bed, remarked to himself, well, I wouldn't have dreamed of her doing that, even though I am a good-looking chap. Yeah. Frog. To ride on a centaur is no doubt a great honor. And except Jill and Eustace, there is no one alive in the world today who has had that honor. But it is very uncomfortable, for no one who has valued his life would suggest putting a saddle on a centaur. And riding bareback is no fun, especially if, like Eustace, you have never learned to ride at all. The centaurs were very polite in a grave, gracious, grown-up kind of way, and as they cantered through the Narnian woods, they spoke without turning their heads, telling the children about the properties of herbs and roots, the influences of the planets, the 9 names of Aslan with their meanings, and that sort of thing. Things of that sort. But however sore and jolted the two humans were, they would now give anything to have that journey over again. To see those glades and slopes sparkling with last night's snow, to be met by rabbits and squirrels and birds that wished you good morning. To breathe again the air of Narnia and hear the voices of the Narnian trees. They came down to the river, flowing bright and blue in the winter sunshine, far below the Blas Bridge, which is at the snug, red-roofed little town of Baruna, and were ferried across in a flat barge by the ferryman, or rather by the ferry wiggle, for it was the Marshwiggle who do most of the water and fishy kinds of work in Narnia. And when they had crossed, they rode along the south bank of the river, and presently came to Cair Paravel itself. At the very moment of their arrival, they saw that same bright ship which they had seen when they first set foot in Narnia, gliding up the river like a huge bird. All the court were once again assembled on the green between the castle and the quay to welcome King Caspian home again. Aurelian, who had changed his black clothes and was now dressed in a scarlet cloak over silver mail, stood close to the water's edge, bareheaded to receive his father. And the dwarf Trumpkin sat beside him in his little donkey chair. The children saw there would be no chance of reaching the prince through all that crowd, and anyway, they now felt rather shy. So they asked the centaurs if they might go on sitting on their backs a little longer and thus see everything over the heads of the courtiers. And the centaur said that they might. The centaur said that they might. Drink of water. Coffee. A flourish of silver trumpets came over the water from the ship's deck. The sailor threw a rope, wharf rats, talking rats, of course, wharf rats, and marsh wriggles made it fast ashore, and the ship was warped in. Musicians hidden somewhere in the crowd began to play solemn, triumphal music, and soon the king's galleon was alongside, and the rats ran the gangway on board her. Jill expected to see the old king come down it, but there appeared to be some hitch. A lord with a pale face came ashore and knelt to the prince and to Trumpkin. The three were talking with their heads close together for a few minutes, but no one could hear what they said. The music played on, but you could feel that everyone was becoming uneasy. Then four knights carrying something and going very slowly appeared on deck. When they started to come down the gangway, you could see that what they were carrying. It was the old king on a bed, very pale and still. They set him down. The prince knelt beside him and embraced him. They could see King Caspian raising his hand to bless his son. And everyone cheered, but it was a half-hearted cheer. So they all felt that something was going wrong. And suddenly the king's head fell back on the pillows. The musicians stopped and there was a dead silence. The prince, kneeling by the king's bed, laid his head upon it and wept. There were whisperings and goings to and fro. Then Jill noticed that all those who wore hats, bonnets, helmets, and hoods were taking them off, Eustace included. Then she heard a rustling and flopping noise up above the castle. When she looked, she saw the great banner with the golden lion on it was being brought down to half-mast. After that, slowly, mercilessly, with wailings, strings, and disconsolate blowing of horns, the music began again, this time a tune to break your heart. They both lifted off their centaurs, who took no notice of them. "I wish I was home," said Jill. Eustace nodded, saying nothing but bit his lip. "I have come," said a deep voice behind them. They turned and saw the lion himself, so bright and real and strong that everything else seemed at once to look pale and shadowy compared with him. And in less time than it takes to breathe, Jill forgot about the dead king of Narnia and remembered only how she had made Eustace fall over the cliff. And how she had helped to muff nearly all the signs, and about all the snappings and quarrelings. And she wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but she could not speak. She was wise enough not to speak. Then the lion drew them towards him with his eyes and bent down and touched their pale faces with his tongue and said, "Think of that no more. I will not always be scolding. You have done the work for which I sent you into Narnia." "Please, Aslan," said Jill, "may we go home now?" "Yes, I have come to bring you home," said Aslan. Then he opened his mouth and wide and blew, but this time they had no sense of flying through the air. Instead, it seemed that they remained still, and the wild breath of Aslan blew away the ship and the dead king and the castle and the snow and the winter sky, for all those things floated off into the air like wreaths of smoke. And suddenly they were standing in great brightness of midsummer sunshine on smooth turf among mighty trees and beside a fair, fresh stream. Then they saw that they were once more on the mountain of Aslan, high up above and beyond the end of that world in which Narnia lies. The strange thing was that the funeral music for King Caspian still went on, though no one could tell where it came from. They were walking beside the stream, and the lion went before them, and he became so beautiful, and the music so despairing that Jill did not know which of them it was that filled her eyes with tears. Then Aslan stopped, and the children looked into the stream. And there, on the golden gravel of the bed of the stream, lay King Caspian dead, with the waters flowing over him like liquid glass. His long white beard swayed in the swayed in it like water weed. And all three stood and wept. And all three stood and wept. Even the lion wept. Great lion tears, each tear more precious than the earth would be if it was a single solid diamond. And Jill noticed that Eustace looked neither like a child crying nor like a boy crying and wanting to hide it, but like a grown-up crying. At least that is the nearest she could get to it. But really, as she said, people don't seem to have any particular ages on that mountain. Hold on. I thought this last chapter was getting awful long. Where'd my water go? $182, $191, yeah, 11 pages. It's a long chapter. One more page than the other ones. I gotta find my place again. And Jill noticed that Eustace looked neither like he was a child crying nor like a boy crying and wanting to hide it, but like a grown-up crying. At least that is the nearest she could get to it. But really, as she said, people don't seem to have any particular ages on that mountain. Son of Adam, said Aslan, go into that thicket and pluck that thorn that you'll find there and bring it to me. Eustace obeyed. The thorn was a foot long and sharp as a rapier. Sword, needle, sword. Arya Stark's needle. Okay. Drive it into my paw, son of Adam, said Aslan, holding up his right forepaw and spreading out the great pad towards Eustace. Must I? Said Eustace. Yes, said Aslan. Then Eustace set his teeth and drove the thorn into the lion's pad, but there came out a great drop of blood, redder than all redness that you've ever seen or imagined, and brighter also. And it splashed into the stream over the dead body of the king. At the same moment, the doleful music stopped, and the dead king began to be changed. His white beard turned to gray, and from gray to yellow, and got shorter and vanished altogether, and his sunken cheeks grew round and fresh, and the wrinkles were smooth, and his eyes opened, and his lips and his eyes and lips both laughed, and suddenly he leaped up and stood before them, a very young man or boy. But Jill couldn't say which because of people having no particular ages in Aslan's country. Even in this world, of course, it is the stupidest children who are the most childish, and the stupidest grown-ups who are the most grown-up. I guess I fit in there somewhere. I'm not sure where. Even in this world, of course, it is the stupidest children who are the most childish, and the stupidest grown-ups who are the most grown-up. Yeah. Stupidest grown-ups are the most grown-up. I don't qualify there. I'm not a stupid child, but anyway. I'm an adult who's still a child, I guess. And he rushed to Aslan and flung his arms around him as far as they could go around the huge neck. And he gave Aslan the strong kisses of a king, and Aslan gave him the wild kisses of a lion. At last, Caspian turned to the others. He gave a great laugh of astonished joy. Why, Eustace, he said, Eustace. So he did reach the end of the world after all. What again, my second best sword that you broke on that sea serpent? Eustace made a step toward him and with both hands and held out, but he then drew back with a somewhat startled expression. Look here, I say, he stammered. It's all very well, but aren't you? Didn't you? Well, don't be such an ass, said Caspian. But, said Eustace, looking at Aslan, hasn't he, died? Yes, said the lion in a very quiet voice, almost, Jill thought, as if he were laughing. He has died. Most people have, you know. Even I have. There are very few people who haven't. Oh, said Caspian. Oh, I see what's bothering you. You think I'm a ghost or some nonsense. Well, don't you see? I would be that if I appeared in Narnia now. because I don't belong there anymore. But no, one can't be a ghost in one's own country. I might be a ghost if I got into your world. I don't know, but I suppose it isn't yours either now you're here. A great hope rose in the children's hearts, but Aslan shook his shaggy head. A great hope rose in the children's hearts when he said that, but Aslan shook his shaggy head. No, my dears, he said, when you meet me here again, you will have come to stay, but not now. You must go back to your own world for a while. Sir, said Caspian, I always wanted to have just one glimpse of their world. Is that wrong? You cannot want wrong things anymore now that you have died, my son, said Aslan. You shall see their world for 5 minutes of their time. It will take no longer for you to set things right there. Then Aslan explained to Caspian what Jill and Eustace were going back to and all about Experiment House and how he seemed to know it quite as well as they did. Daughter, said Aslan to Jill, pluck a switch off that bush. She did, and as soon as she was in her hand, it turned into a fine new riding crop. Now, sons of Adam, draw your swords, said Aslan. But use only the flat, for it is cowards and children, not warriors, against whom I send you. Use only the flat, for it is cowards and children, not warriors, against whom I send you. Are you coming with us, Aslan, said Jill. They shall only see my back, said Aslan. He led them rapidly through the wood. Before they had gone many paces, the wall of Experiment House appeared before them. Then Aslan roared so that the sun shook in the sky, and 30 feet of the wall fell down before them. They looked through the gap and down into the school shrubbery and onto the roof of the gym, all under the same dull autumn sky which they had seen before their adventures began. They're coming back at the same minute they left. Aslan turned to Jill and Eustace and breathed upon them and touched their foreheads with his tongue. Then he lay down amid the gap that he had made in the wall and turned his golden back to England and his lordly face toward his own lands. At that moment, Jill saw figures whom she knew only too well running up through the laurels toward them. Most of the gang were there, Adela Pennyfather and Colmanelli Major, Edith Winterblot, Spotty Scorner, Big Bannister, and the two loathsome Garrick twins. But suddenly they stopped. Their faces changed, and all the meanness, conceit, cruelty, and sneakiness almost disappeared in one single expression of terror. For they saw the wall fall down, and a lion as large as a young elephant lying in the gap, and 3 figures in glittering clothes with weapons in their hands rushing down upon them. For with the strength of Aslan in him, Jill plied her crop on the girls, and Caspian and Eustace plied the flats of their swords on the boys so well that in the 2 minutes all the bullies were running like mad, crying out, "Murder, fascist lions, it isn't fair. It isn't fair." And then the head, who was, by the way, a woman, came running out to see what was happening. And when she saw the lion in the broken wall and Caspian and Jill and Eustace, whom she quite failed to recognize, she had hysterics and went back into the house and began ringing up the police with stories about a lion escaped from a circus and escaped convicts who broke down walls and carried drawn swords. In the midst of all this fuss, Jill and Eustace slipped quietly indoors and changed out of their bright clothes into ordinary things, and Caspian went back into his own world. In the wall at Aslan's word was made whole again. When the police arrived and found no lion, no broken wall, no convicts, and the head behaving like a lunatic, there's an inquiry into the whole thing. An investigation, and the inquiry and in the investigation, all sorts of things about Experiment House came out, and about 10 people got expelled. After that, the head's friends saw that the head was of no use as a head. They got her made an inspector to interfere with other heads. And when they found that she wasn't much good even at that, they got her into Parliament, where she lived happily. Put her in the government. Oh, shit. Jeez. Where she lived happily ever after, yeah. All the rejects that should be in mental institutions or nursing homes, in our government. Mitch, what's his name, and Nancy Plagosi, Arlen Sphincter. Anyway, they got her into Parliament, where she lived happily ever after. Eustace buried his fine clothes secretly one night in the school grounds, but Jill smuggled hers home and wore them at a fancy dress ball next holidays. And from that day forth, things changed for better at the Experiment House, and it became quite a good school. And Jill and Eustace were always good friends. But far off in Narnia, where King Aurelian buried his father, Caspian the Navigator, 10th of that name, and mourned for him. He himself ruled Narnia well, and the land was happy in his days. He himself ruled Narnia well, and the land was happy in his days, though Puddleglum, whose foot was as good as new in 3 weeks, often pointed out that bright mornings brought on wet afternoons. You couldn't expect good times to last. The opening into that hillside was left open, and often in hot summer days, the Narnians would go in there with ships and lanterns and down to the water and sail to and fro, singing on the cool, dark underground sea, telling each other stories of the cities that lie fathoms below. If you ever have the luck to go to Narnia yourself, do not forget to have a look at those caves. There you go. Caves are not really cool. They're cool because they're subsurface and they're water down there. Very cool. I'm hoping to find caves here someday. I know there's a cave below us because when they're drilling a well right on this property, they lost like 180 foot of drill stem, not the stem and the casing. They dropped 150 feet of casing. As it was spinning, vibration snapped it off, broke the welds, and dropped down. Boom! Never got it back out because I couldn't find it. And down there somewhere, and then it goes that way. Yeah, and over where I was over there by Bill's and my son's land over there's a cave over there too. I know the ground was bubbling up one time. A friend of mine told me when I first moved to Missouri, that's how you find caves. You go out when it's really heavy rain, just listen for bubbling. And I went over by the garage or the shop over there, and I was like, with bad hearing at 30 feet out, the noise was so loud that I walked over and there's violent bubbling coming out of the ground. So there's a cave down there right below the shop. Yeah, there was a sinkhole too, right in line with it. So anyway, meandering, mumbling. Okay, good night, everybody. Everybody say goodbye. Sarge, hang in, bro. Thank you. God bless, Sarge. Love you. Like to meet you someday. I never did find out what state you're in. Are you in a state of confusion or a state of emergency or state of whatever? State of Ohio, Indiana, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina. Where are you at? Like to know. Like to come meet you someday. Lord made that happen. Anyway, thank you. God bless, buddy. See ya. Let's get this thing down here. So there you go, my grandsons and granddaughters and sons and daughters. Listen to this story someday and be blessed. So, with my meandering initial talk and then my other long talk about Caitlin Clark. So, learned some lessons there from an old man with a little bit of wisdom. I don't know how much, but some wisdom. It says that without vision, the people perish. It's an article not really in there, but without vision, the people perish. And somebody's got to have vision for the tribe, for the family, for the lineage, and look forward to the future. So that's what I've been doing. Everybody laughs at me for that and mocks me for that. That's your problem. What the Bible says about children who raise the eyebrow, they should be put to death. So don't raise your eyebrow at old people. Don't make fun of old people. And another thing, one time, so it's a very wise saying here that if you ask an elderly person a question, have the decency, have the honor, have the self-control to sit there, shut your mouth, and listen to their answer. Learn something from them. I think at one time, I never heard that because this is when I was younger. I was out on my cousin's farm, aunt and uncle's farms, and I asked Don Mollahan one time. I said, "Uncle Don, how many cattle do you have?" And he goes, and 45 minutes later, he finished telling me about 200 head. There's 15 here at the Johnson place. There's 35 here on our home place, and there's 35 over there on the blah 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 place, and there's 22 here, and there's 15. And he knew exactly how many there were and how many were where they were. Literally about 45 minutes. I just sat there and tried to take it all in. It was hopeless, all over my head. I didn't know the first place he mentioned, I didn't know where it was, other than where we were at there at the moment, at the time. Anyway, so my job is to vision ahead for the family, for the friends, for the community, for my people, for my tribe. Vision ahead, provision. That's what provision means. 1 Timothy 5:8. I'm going to finish with that one, okay? It says that if a man provide not for his own, especially they of his own house, he's worse than an unbeliever. And that whole passage in that, before that and after that, talks about providing for widows and orphans and things like that, Provision. But provision, the word provide in English means provide, pro-video. In the Latin, which is where the English is from, pro-video, that's the Latin, pro-video. But the basis of the English word is to video for other people. Video. And the Greek text there, it's pronoeo, to mind for other people, to think for other people. So I remember one time my son was kind of making fun of me because he said, well, if you're worth, I was making $20 an hour. He goes, well, if you're worth $20 an hour, I'm worth $50 an hour. So my reply to him was, well, if you're worth $50 an hour, I'm worth $200 an hour. So for 5 years, the guy paid me $200 an hour. I said, someday somebody's going to pay me to do their thinking for them. And the guy stood in my living room there and said, sales I got, I understand marketing. I know business. He said, what I need is somebody to, in so many words, he said, do my research, do my thinking for me. That's what he hired me to do. Paid me $200 an hour to do his thinking for him. That's where the tuning element comes from. So I don't have the sweater on today, but anyway, I am tired. That's too long. A long talk and a long talk and then a chapter. I'm done for the day, people. Thank you. Yeah, bless everybody. Good night, Sarge. Hospital's on you, buddy.